I'm so happy to see so many familiar faces and really thrilled to welcome Kimberly Alidio and Grace Nissan tonight. Welcome to you both. Woo! Before we begin, few brief announcements. This Friday at the Poetry Project, we're hosting Arjuna Newman and Denise Ferrer da Silva for a screening and a conversation. So come out for that if you're free. And next week, very importantly, on October 8th, on Wednesday, we're celebrating the release of Fire Spitter, which is Jane Cortez collected oeuvre. It's going to be a huge sanctuary event with a lot of readings and performances, so I invite you all to come back for that as well. That's it for upcoming events. Otherwise, there are, everyone knows that, but there are bathrooms on the first floor, an accessible bathroom on the ground floor. If you need to get there, just let me or anyone else on staff know, and we'll open the door for you. And what else? There are two amazing books for sale at the table over there, The Utopians by Grace and Traceable Relation by Kimberly. I really, truly recommend them. They're both incredible. Okay, I think that's it for announcement. I also want to thank our guest introducer tonight, Oliver Silverman, who is going to introduce Grace Nissan. Woo! Thank you for doing this, Oliver. And yeah, the stage is yours.
Hi, everyone. I am extremely honored to introduce Grace Nissan and their new book, The Utopians. Before The Utopians by Grace, Utopia by Thomas More was already a text of many texts whose operations jostle authorship. Utopia begins with a realistic dialogue between Thomas More's character of himself, Thomas More, and the character Raphael Hythloday, a name that means nonsense talk in Greek. Hythloday, who is said to have been on one of the first colonial voyages, is the mouthpiece that delivers up anthropological descriptions of the island of Utopia. In its first printings, More's Utopia was sandwiched by fictional paratexts, a map of the island of Utopia, a poem written in the Utopian language and translated to Latin, and letters from men in More's circle that extend the game that Utopia is a real place beyond the book's spine. Like Grace's Utopians, More's book is a set of optical illusions, masks, and parallax views. And it was written at a moment that perspective itself was beginning to be theorized. Perspective, from perspectiva, literally means seeing through. Perspective appears once the entire picture has been transformed into a window, when our eyeballs become unglued from the Euclidean line and take pleasure in the distortions that forms suffer on our retina. Anyone who texts with Grace knows that they are always making windows out of garbage, that More isn't any different from the photograph of the disused glove become poem. They walk around harvesting the airwaves, gleaning loose sentences strung together by the magnetic recombinations of chance in the city. Grace is a translator, listening for the melody and not the words, living for the humming that threads everything together. Winkingly collaging reality, which is their alchemy. And they are always obliquely reminding me that I can't just say, here, now, let's break the fourth wall. That obstruction can fruit the lushest views. The Utopians has clues for an oblique approach to the overstuffed genocidal scripts we've been dealt. For how to rebuild the set using only planks of this ruined stage. Clues for how we stop squeezing our faces and start to squeeze the mirror. To squeeze the mirror very hard. Then maybe we'll see that the seeing is grace. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Oliver. anti-utopian in the true utopian sense. Oliver is also a scholar of Thomas More, and thus of me as well. I'm going to read mostly from the Utopians, but I want to start with a few old poems, which I think sit well with it, from an old book called "The City is Lush with Obstructed Views." Shout out to Anna, who published this. But when they came for me, the server stopped responding. Hello, that screaming working? Muted by the subway, I would not say yes or no. I'm not like other guys. I am Antonin Artaud. No, one's original. Hate the preciousness of all that empty space without pigeons. The changing needs of the users. I return as an enjoyer, dark Narcissus sequence. Take what's yours, a number and seat 28. You don't know how much I need you, vague, like a stone gargoyle scrapped in planning to communicate over changing conditions, the river under bridges. Night, night, dipshit. Towering I-beams, shy without a concrete tunic, vomit anxious shadow. It's now, never. Send it back, server, stopped responding. You late bloomer, bloom revolution. Like a growth spurt, obsolesce my wardrobe. For you, I file ardently complaints. Buildings, a face plant in gold leaf, redeemable when. With no illustrations, written in precious Latin, the morning betrays its constituents. I sit near the window, which for now overpowers my lamp. No images, read the caption. The organic can also be militant, pass under these axial elms. Famously turpentine, I enter the hall of paintings. In my window, frosted hexagons. If you watch me masturbate, are you a voyeur or a pointillist? Sir, I'm afraid the parade's been canceled. Confetti will be mailed out one piece for every citizen. Why risk the friction? Banish gravel for sounding its tension. Send the strangest message. Please do not reply. Okay, I'm going to read from this book, The Utopians, which has 3 parts. One is a sequence called The Utopians, which is written just with language from Thomas More's Utopia. And all of those parts start, I must tell you about, or I must tell you more about. And there's also a poem called The World, which is by Grace Nissen, and then there are some letters to Thomas More as well. So I'm going to weave through these. It's a little toasty. The world. The first world was suffering, suffering. The second world was liberation. Liberation, but why, said the first world, does it sound so much like suffering? Like suffering only once, the second world said, like suffering plus change. Is that not the first world? No, said the second world. The first world is suffering plus nature. The second world is suffering plus change. How come, someone said, and we can't know what world they said it from, how come you can't get rid of suffering? The second world answered, well then where would the world be? We don't want to free ourselves from the world. I must tell you about the Utopians. Utopians import nothing but themselves from other countries. As for their repeated experiments, papyrus manuscripts, they love hearing what goes on. No one is prepared to pay them. Their friends are allowed, public works, convicts, for anyone to give them by rubbing or scratching what really happens, my dear Moore, fair and sensible arrangements. Others mend roads, clean out ditches, repair bridges. Such miracles form the cream of utopian society. Nieces are elected by secret ballot to prevent the formation of pressure groups. They say the whole country pays for a miracle. Bring any country to a standstill. Take the same form with everyone. Say it's hard to find. It's hard to find. Hold up their hands. Start thinking up arguments, and that's farming. Utopia was named, as they say, with a lamp to show the sun at a place which has since been identified into submission. The world. The first world was a world, the second invention. The first world was a world, the second critique. The first world was a world, the second the survival of the first in other terms. We had started saying phrases like bad utopia. Collective speech like a mime with shoplifting nouns from imagined shelves. So well imagined, I wept to see how empty they were. As punditry sounded, what is this? Venezuela, Texas, the Soviet Union, the world. What is this, the world? So we started speaking, not quite at the same time, until someone thought the voice was plural and that politics had arrived like a breath of fresh pollution. The first world was a world, the second invention. Tried to reverse the coordinates, but got stuck on the same equation. Labor and punishment, prison and syntax, even the sodomy was trickle down. Picture this. The first world was the world, the second was again. The first world was the stage, the second was the set, built from the planks of the first world stage. And the more elaborate the escape towards the rafters, the more hollow the foundation, ensuing collapse. And the second world looked just like the heap of the first, falling, rise higher. But I must tell you more about the towns. There's nothing to be at home. Rent collectors in grand style, persuaded to take the sort of risks they also invent, France, for instance, by buying up a great many copies. Actually, come face some city wall they keep hammering away at, so gradually they withdraw at night. This is to allow for they get nothing out of it. Their churches look, because of their size, right ideas about things grown dissatisfied with. Everyone will start laughing at you. You start laughing at you. A pretty face, the form of public argument. When the utopians talk, they mean countries aren't very scrupulous. They're very wild forests. They've gone to war for their employers. Utopians don't care, and money means the whole army. But they're perfectly happy, as I explained, to make them change sides. A single utopian citizen, there are very few of them. Vacancies created a few square inches of face. Or the utopians did not retain any private property without signs of embarrassment. News from nowhere, or by oversleeping, shamelessly picking the colony's strawberries. Trespassers, this translation is based on. Passage 1. Dear Moore, as a child I was real, I deployed the speech of others. My presence was nothing more than a factorial of the social material in any room. I always suffered the attack from inside, the Trojan horse of my psyche. Was it my brother or my mother or my father speaking through my own mouth? I didn't have visions, voices led. But when I cleared out for your voice, I could speak without words on what I'd left. My silence could begin to demand abundance beyond any one locution. Little diagrams of my walking through the city without speech, black flowers where she stopped and swayed, it might read. I admit I turned to you at a time when I could not turn to myself. The world was sick, in winter after riot, time was migrainous. And then you started singing in the throat in my ear, so I was hearing, and hearing meant singing, yours, G. Now I'm going to let Thomas More talk. Last night we let the Thomas More talk. I feel almost ashamed to send you this little book about the utopian republic. That's how you started Utopia, with a letter to introduce Utopia through its messenger, Raphael. Some people say that he has died somewhere on his travels, others that he has gone back to his own country, others again that he has returned to Utopia, partly because he felt nostalgic about it, and partly because he couldn't stand the way Europeans behaved. The world. The first world was born, and the second world was born. But the second world had to cannibalize the parts available, this baby sibling world, mirror of the first. The first world was a world, but the second was a smartass, seeking revenge and reversing the predicates, beckoning the first world forward, scooting away, to watch the world fall on its face. This was the second world, the world that forgot it was the first world because it called for the abolition of the first world. But it forgot to abolish the first world in the second. It forgot that it was a peninsula. But the first world was made by someone else. Was it God or Thomas More or my mother? And the second world was made from the pieces of the first. Like yours, More, or my tract, written from your text, can only figure an ocean between land masses. But like a little sibling cannibalizing the parts available, devouring the affect, stringing up a more convincing marionette, a second world which said, down with the first world, forgetting it was the first world. It was the first world's little kin. Here's Tom again. I didn't have the problem of finding my own subject matter and puzzling out a suitable form. All I had to do was repeat what Raphael told us. So much of it was ready-made that there was practically nothing left for me to do. My job was simply to write down what I'd heard. So I finally finished Utopia, and I'm sending it to you, my dear Peter, in the hope that you will read it and tell me if I've left anything out. Dear More, I admit I turned to you at a time when I could not turn. The world sick, riot, time migrainous, my head split, yet there was light I could see, the third precinct up in flames, its ash in cold mirrors like lunar snow. I took you off the shelf to feel some words pass through my fingers in what I'd come to know as writing. And then you started singing in the throat in my ear. Now I'm hearing, and hearing means singing, yours, G. But I must tell you more about the scribes. My dear Peter, I hardly know what to admire. The enclosed account of Utopia, please go on liking me. Miss any conversation that might have servants. Search your memory to be a stranger in Utopia. I'm sending it to you, completely forgotten. My dear More, that he was tired. Communism minus our converts, my dear converts, that is for my converts. Utopia wasn't retailing. Like a talented author had seen absolutely nothing, to get an even clearer picture, died somewhere on his travels and whispered more. Perhaps I ought to leave, desperately anxious to never be adopted in England. Vagrants in the same way predict, without giving it a trial, every rude name, splendid regulation. So I started giving lessons by scientific method. Quite miraculous that I'd have thought it non-combatant. Utopians are treated worse than dictionaries. The world. The first world was to lose but our chains, but the second world was nothing. The first world was the world, the second was, but didn't know it was. I'll be back, said the first world. The second world was do not go gentle into that good was. The first world was losing its world to the second. The second world was coming, but when it came to the door, it answered in the robes of the first world. So when you said fourscore and 7, so when you said to be or not, so when you said, frankly, my dear, I don't give a, when you said what the world had said, the world was world, and you couldn't get out of it. You had to say what the world said against itself. You had to say, make America. You had to say, sexual relations with. You had to say, ever after. You had to let the world say what it says. You speak in a locked room, which creates another room, even if you can't get out of it. But I must tell you more about the obvious. It's not as if I recommend the system operated in utopia, where things are fun, but I can't see what good they've done, retreating while advancing. Aren't all human beings sort of war damage on the part of the architects? Carry the Latin, whereof no man is bound to employers and similar superstitions. Sucking fish, the remora, thought capable of retarding the movement of a ship, to labor the obvious, i.e., under the present system. Be completely out of place. Abandon ship as effectively as you could wish. He hands it over without any sort of payment. Countries you won't find by simply moving, a single community that is a thoroughly miserable introduction to logic. Some people are so humorless and nothing but the truth, a stranger in my own utopia. The world. But the second world was when the first world forgot itself. A phrase like bad utopia, like blackheads in the mirror. You had to squeeze the mirror and see if the blackhead would leave your skin. The world was like that. At least the world was like that. But we wanted it to become the world was not, so we squeezed the mirror very hard. But I must tell you about the weather. Signs of approaching rain, and yet discovered the same principles they've still failed to invent. Control the winds, you'd ruin philosophizing. Give us back envious neighboring. Give us back died of starvation. I kept thinking of feel they'll never be able enough in the past. The meanness of the weather, fundamental bonds like that. Become addicted to what really happens, or merely involves pain. Your body is just thrown unceremoniously into a pond. The utopians are strict about that kind of thing. The most antisocial hemisphere. Sea is salt you hope to gain by after effects. The utopians produced entirely after death failed to invent a single one. The world. The world. The world was the world. And then there was a world the world was not. Call it the second world, the world imagined it could be. The world. Semantic satiation of the world. The world was a sound losing meaning through repetition, so a second world emerged in the mind of the first world, a world starved of meaning. And the second world negated the world. As it took its bricks, it decried the mortar. As it constructed the edifice, it defied the foundations. It became a better world, but forgot it was the first world, so it rebuilt the things it abolished in negation. Island forgot its connections. Every so often, as you walk down a street, you come to a large building which has a special name of its own. Hello, special name of its own. Hello, a large building. Hello, walk down a street. Hello, the dead mix freely. Hello, or not to be. The utopians are their own, nothing to lose but. Here's Moore again. Moore is a bit worried because he doesn't know the exact position of the island. As a matter of fact, Raphael did mention it, but only very briefly and incidentally. You see, just as Raphael was touching on the subject, a servant came up to Moore and whispered something in his ear. And although this made me listen with even greater attention, at the critical moment, one of his colleagues started coughing rather loudly. I suppose he'd caught cold on the boat, so that the rest of Raphael's sentence was completely inaudible. Passage 2. Dear Moore, I couldn't escape my precipice, the world I couldn't live in to abolish, and yet wanted it, knowing I was part of it, a cliff in cognition I fall off to define or denounce. When I was small, I brutalized magnets. I could not bear the force between things. I avoided every sidewalk crack, not for the proverbial back I was breaking, but the pain of that gap through my sneaker, a rift, missing language. Its odd emptiness haunting, freaking me to symmetry. All I could do was rush to find its mirror in the left foot, pressed into the next crack. A silence words gathered around to disease. Even now I'm bleeding open with the gaps which exploded through me. I was a child's lunar touch in legal history. The crying crack in every sentence's back as I spoke the words spoken to me in hapless symmetry. And then you started singing like a window which sees is looked through, and that's how it sees, with the eyes of others. Throat in the ear that hears to sing. And then came a cough, a whisper, and the whole resplendent structure found its worm, here, where I can only speak your language, yours, G. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Grace. That was wonderful. And thank you, Oliver, for your beautiful introduction. It is now my pleasure to introduce Kimberly Alidio. Reading Kimberly Alidio, Traceable Relation, I wonder, it's nice that you're sitting right there. I can look at you. How do you write about writing that is acutely aware of itself as a subject of language? Or think critically about prose that is critically engaged with its own making without lapsing into redundancy? For, quote, a poem that is an essay annotating essays and interviews, end of quote, sentence scarcity or semantic preciousness isn't a real thing. In Kimberly Alidio's creative economy, each word is indebted to the falling one, forming a system of relation where perception is forged through repetition and recursion, rather than singularly authored lines. Everyone and everything is involved here. makers of all sorts, musicians, filmmakers, artists, family members, friends, partners, all gathered in a shared inquiry some may call critique, if critique were to forego hierarchies of judgment, applying pressure instead on matter where it meets meaning. And that's what Kimberly does. Her prose swerving from filmic analysis to diasporic grief to phone operators rehearsing scripted services. Language collides with itself, breaking existing bonds to form new ones. A steady sprawl tearing at, quote, the top layer of everything, end of quote. Though everyone involved in Kimberly's writing appears in an extensive bibliography, traceable relation works around the anxiety of citation. This is how I want to teach writing, against the conventions of the entire apparatus of Western academic form. A living bibliography where indebtedness doesn't need to be codified, because that's how we think, chaotically and with others. How would we make sense otherwise of our most private feelings? The loss suffusing everything we see, the impossible representation of a dying father, how mourning itself is at odds with the structure of sentences. The essay and its poetic variant may be the genre best suited to explore diasporic grief, which often comes down to a question of location. Where do you mourn your loved ones? Where do you want to be buried? Here or there? The critic in me, the one inclined toward judgment, wants to bash poems that fetishize our grandmother's homelands, the sweet aromas of pre-industrial food, etc. But I resist the pleasure I take in negativity. Instead, I'm grateful to traceable relation for giving us a kind of grief that stands against nostalgia, setting letters in motion, like my son was just beginning to write and has banned all vowels from his sonic transcriptions. His handwriting isn't his alone. The dead are pulling at the shape of each letter, refusing the entire business of meaning. There are places in Kimberly's father's journal, quote, that slant dramatically to the right and become tighter, end of quote. Quote, who is to say my father's afterlife is in my life moving in real time with this written text, end of quote. Truly, there is nothing unsayable, since the unsayable can only be intuited through what can be said, an inversion that pegs absence to a particular presence, signaling a totality that remains otherwise imperceptible. I don't know if the argument makes sense. It doesn't matter. What matters is refusing to indulge in what Kimberly calls the anti-commons, quote, elite softness in alignment, end of quote. Keeping language where it belongs, on the page, in the room, belligerent and disorienting in open collective study. Please join me in welcoming Kimberly Alidio.
Okay. I'm going to actually just start reading, and then which gives me some time to process. So I'm going to start by reading from this pamphlet, 1080 Press's Shared Discernments with Rebecca Teich. Let's see, which one do I read? Okay. Shared Discernments. On the balcony at the Poetry Project during the New Year's Day marathon, escaping the socio-aesthetic riptide that lay below, you asked me some direct questions. How did you come to practice intimacy in the way that you do? What is the origin story or points of origin to your forms and methods of relating? I remember the swelling of music from below as a performance artist emerged from the audience, as I whispered in your ear, at first for clarification, and then an attempt to narrativize. You've since talked with me about scenes of varied ensembles working out intimacy in friendship, collaborations, bathtubs, orgies, panel presentations, group trips, performances, and site-specific gatherings. But what you and I have talked about most energetically is poetry. Reading it, going to readings, noting the public and publication rituals centered in certain circles of New York poetry. Now that we are talking about ways in which roving groups of friends and partners can be present in the moment together in dynamic ways and in open-ended ways, we're finally talking about writing. The texts we've been making, as well as the one we're making together here, it all comes together for me in how people find each other to make a social life alongside what makes sense to them, rather than from what sense has been made outside of them to then internalize. Buy the pamphlet's really good. So it's really an interesting situation, I think, listening to Miren introduce me, trying to play this role of, the public, the social, the personal. But what would flashback is just sitting across Miren at a dining hall table or under the sun trying to co-teach something together. And her book came before mine on language and grief. And I just can't help but feel all of that. And similar to a lot of people in this room who also love teaching and love writing and think about it all the time and how much I've learned from every single one of them. And everyone's in the book. But for those who I don't know as well, I just feel like, well, we're collaborating together. So I want to thank Grace for this reading, for the book, for the Utopians. So I first stepped into this room in 2019. I started my adventure with Stacy Samazik, who had just left 13 years at the project, 11 as the director. She was reading with Bernadette Mayer, Renee Gladman, Brenda Coultis. Oh, it was tremendous and amazing. And but I'd always projected myself into this room because in the 2010s in Austin, Texas, I would receive the newsletter and I would read it devotionally, especially the calendar. I would read who was reading at what time, everything. I would just read it. And so I'd be in Austin, Texas, and I'm just like, okay. And I was lucky to read the Zoom reading in 2020. But, to be here, it's many layers of things. Also, I think I kept receiving the newsletter long after my subscription ran out, so thank you for that. Okay, I'm going to read a couple of things. Something that's actually about collaboration in the time period that we're in now. The generative violence of being in time. What it means to live and to exist is not to be static, but dynamic. And this means being in relation to time. There are multiple encultured ways, according to Georgina Bourne, in which people live in time and not just conceive or perceive it. Time is alive, and if we are in time, we are alive. In a modern time long ago, liberal humanism gave some people the means and language to make history. This is contemporaneity, or what Eugen Minkowski calls, as quoted by Gaston Bachelard, a feeling of participation in a flowing onward. Meanwhile, colonialism disrupts living languages, both through extinction and by fixing them to static times and static places. So some languages mark their speakers and territories to be contained, segregated, extracted from, invaded, bombed, contaminated, checkpointed, surveilled, denuded, starved, redrawn, renamed, rewritten. Other languages make history. To write in the time of genocidal colonialism, then, is to be in other times of genocidal colonialisms, in times of being trans amidst genocidal gender, and within times of blackness as a condition at the outer limits of what constitutes a human being in modern liberal humanist thought. At present, many are in the dramatic ambient situations of interruption and disruption. These ruptures mark before, during, and after. A period after, which could be post-something or afterlife, takes on the ever-presence of Black thought on the afterlife of slavery, which means slavery is not dead, but actively structures Blackness into the contemporary present. The contemporary genocidal time brings me to a rupture known as the Philippine-American War, a complex of pressures placed on history and time, mandated by benevolent assimilation policy and enacted in representations of actual schooling and a concept of political tutelage. Most immediately, there is announced annihilation of every human and animal on the island of Samar in 1899. As well as in particular topographies and clusters of exceptional states. In these present rhythms of fascist violence and generative violence, our contemporary moment of genocide ruptures any sense that we who are in this moment can share this time. We are properly in our time, rather than witnessing it or conceiving of it. Being alive is an impossibility here. So much possibility for liberation, according to Avi Sakatopoulos, arises in flashes that regularly pass us by. These bursts of self-sovereignty and overwhelm are not durational, she says, but arise in transient bursts. She repeatedly advises us to slow down our thinking to attend to such a flash, to walk to the Hudson River, writes Etel Adnan, to cross many green lights, to see the sun go down and leave a band of light over the river, to remember the scene as it was and still is. Entire historiographies of tactical care, Black flourishing, the descent of trans dynamism, of native vitalities, anti-colonial direct action, Palestinian intifadas, the guttural howl, the brilliance of ensembles and collaborations beyond the eye of cultural and art industries, wield a generative violence necessary to be in relation to time. After becomes during, and before becomes the dream of after, the relief of shared articulation, a kind of feeling of participation, despite colonialism's attempt to interrupt an articulation of a flowing onward. So that is a kind of introduction in some ways to what I'm going to be reading. Traceable relation is a direct and indirect address to my father, who at the time of writing had just passed after 7 years of living with late-stage cancer. I'm going to read, there's a long poem in the middle of this book that I'm going to read. And the only context I think I want to say is that there are a lot of people named here, and you may think it's you or someone sitting next to you. But there are also people who are not completely named, and I just wanted to say it engages with a lot of Filipino diasporic art by Stephanie Suhuko, Gina Ostrolo, and Maya Cruz Palaleo. Dread poem. This poem begins with things I dread. Pages of text, bricks bound into bricks, group bonding, thickened surfaces, hefty self-importance, infinite strands worn down to one. Benji offers a poetry workshop on dread, or how I tend to feel about workshops. So this poem begins. Lucy began in poetry and found her calling in the novel, a form so capacious and compellingly thick. I write elsewhere how I love the written form, as singularly poetic. It takes me many books to respect formal poetry as pure abstraction. Like the undyed, thick cotton sweater I lust after far more than I do dental insurance. As a Marylander with, a yellowing Maryland bridge. A life can be 5 years in poetry, a decade and a half in essay, a second decade and a half in poetry. In this life, you are someone who leaves, Hai Sung says to Nora, nay, Na Young, a former self she left behind, in Seoul to be Nora in NYC. Adult Hai Sung takes a vacation to hand Na Young back to Nora. What compels Celine Song to adapt her life to film, to a narrative feature with hipster Hollywood A24? Why would I forego the chance to cry about imperfect returns if her film were a novel? Why don't poets adapt films into poems rather than autofiction? This is a poem in other hallways on a chatty drive to Rhinebeck to see past lives, past noon hungers, pangs, hourly peed twinges, Astrid Mortenson's homespun sound sampling from southwest Sweden via links to Bandcamp pasted into the Notes app that begins when Stosh starts a poem called Essay. Essay 5 has just begun in a shared Google Doc. It says, I too contain bibliographies. So comes and goes, being in one's body, among others and theirs, a weather delirium. Under a roof, a family fuses around a word used to refer to the meaning of another. Several generations might have disintegrated if it weren't for word strings in unison, transporting us to a perfect state without language. Words as signs of shame, books as signs of exile, stinking tower of propagation, lit of lament without the partying. I can't celebrate my upcoming birthday or any holidays thereafter in the absence of long tables of suckling pig and sour beer, enough people I care to look at, carrying me out onto cobbled streets, into fields, stripping, clawing at each other, preparing our hands to be worms. TBH, I might be too basic for my fugitive party of unsteady translators getting out of hand. Mahjong, agimat, hand-carved nada, reddish mahogany living room sets sliding across fluorescent lino tile against which chinelas slap. All refractions my father leaves behind. Our common languages refuse to alight. A thing I'll call secret for sake of functionality. Thickly drawn line, smells that water the eyes and sting, details carved, woven, and burned, feverish will to destroy the here now, to master at edges of fury and grief, desire and satisfaction, one by one extracted from bodies and streams, cast into objects, and dutifully obtained with fanfare, onto and into one's body, food, amulet, garment, punctured ink. This is me, or was once. Rococo motherfuckers siphon it off and sell it back. We are a private people, Mom says simply. We don't get your aesthetic, she might as well have said. We can be okay, emptied of stories, of gestures and dances, genders and rituals, memories, dull, dull, dull dismay as the day is long. I'm sick of corpses as retreat, everyone's altars, mongering mystical stenches of fermented organ. Some Art to Speak poem translation of the English language Shrines exhibit catalog. A mass graph, Pinot Psyche, grim lull ocean, ice iron ocular, intimating takeout ministry. Did that make enough of a gap of delay? In tween suburban MD, the smartest animals don nightshirts, a protective circle, a slumber party trick, in lieu of substances-induced delirium, to repair by breaking ourselves down, breaking our falls, fainting from ritualized hyperventilation, choking off words we can't say, pleasures of petite seizure. Later on, my yellow walls, glossy with collaged pages from interview, cut and paste opens up, a deconsecrated church where we party in isolation. What are your thoughts on anarchy? Becca asks. To make a poem would be to risk something, I quote LaBelle, except he says, party. Such reply only emerges anticipating your reading, the beauty and power of knowing how unstable this is. I enter the Shrines show in the overseas outpost of the Manila Art Gallery on a day trip to the city in the greater dank archipelago of the unseen, to see Ana Ding's street portraits of people angling hand mirrors to make light burst in front of their faces. Body and ecology in a style of conjunction, as Lucy says, of fiction's periscope. Serial moments, 5 transparencies in light boxes, solar flare captives, a narrative of a day. Such care with error to repair the form with visual lags, frozen strobe lights, visual time of a narrative still. Tenny, who speaks too fast, says in seminar something about the poem and the novel taking turns stealing from one another. As less and more sovereign, he reads Dickinson's Walking Bird as a decomposed set of operations, testing both nature and machine in cinematic sequence, left to right, power dashes. Patrick's handmade book revels in the mixtape, a bit nostalgic for the pre-cut A Thief of Time. I swore a blue streak when his ghost pops up in the Catskills, WTF, 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 12 years after we last meet at a departmental dinner under the Edwards Plateau, my first real encounter with a working Filipinx poet, back when we'd say, ow, in a bloomed incision of vowels. What is the lifespan of a poet's career? 2 tired writers on folding chairs, atop a scarp, a 2-way mirror. Alien is the coin even to a monster, a poet's career. The skip at the plateau, a lanyap seam, functionally called spirit, kapwa. Poets cast that extra into bricks of declarative text in a dead, sober festivity. Essays often extra to books of poems. This enters tunnels cast by essays, offbeat rapture, with unsteady foot, syncoped tongue, lagging marks, in homage to Nate Mackey's form. A figure double steps in many gouaches and oils, painted by Maya Cruz Palaleo. 2 violins, 2 flowers, 2 flaneuses, 2 become 3, 1,000 arms. A family of 5 waiters treading teal waters, one the color of ash shadowed by hanging wildflowers. A gloomy veil of heady honey, a wordless scene for words. Diwata, lore alone, this field is where I am waking now. Shirley writes an ekphrasis of an opaque, watery gouache, the painter's hand making white, gauzy on brown figures, gazing at their viewer, looking at images of them posing for cameras. Crescent, cradle, sickle, comma, province, shadowing the lake, waterfall, gorge, holy volcano. Province of Maya's mother and my father, 2 revolutionary novels, secret lanzones, peeled back for 6 translucent lobes. Evolved as such by intervening fingers of the Virgin or an angel, depending on the lore, quenching the Christ child or pilgrim. Popular tales party, so the divine divides erstwhile smooth flesh, puckers for a hot touch. Black and white snapshot of 5 relatives at Pagsanhan Falls is a novel under painter's collage and brush. Sampaguita, framing motifs, blossom-strewn lake. The tourist resort returns wild. Enclave painted for genuflection. Garlands, arch of jungle branches. Nothing extracted to sell. Everyone protected, eternal at rest. Maya's artist book slows for the extra art made to make art, collages of US colonial photos and family snapshots, heavy with occasion, fusion by oratory, captive between words, or composed by camera and gun. On the street of an occupied town, tableau of a white woman standing over a child self's serialized blank stares, a novel to be written between the painter's mirror, prisms, a spray of orange dots across a familiar face rendered again by fevered archiving and adaptation. Across visual media, an analog biometric sensibility for ruin, a face among others, color, shape, line, pattern, recognition, palm array, repeated shadow. This data system is me, my relative, my estranged self, says the speaker or the poem, speaking a color photo of me in hot springs on the slope of Mount Makiling, teenaged face among 5 improvised mouths, monstering raucous girl law, gang hazing my gigantic diasporic body, which I plunge giddily into crisis. Strange words turning me strange and stranger girls into my lolas, crashers plus randos on the scene, a gap laughs. Text repertoire. A photogram indexes shadowy moves on light-sensitive paper. More surface area and space, stosh texts, just as 3 different ways to eclipse a face come to mind. Handheld mirror, reflective mummy tape, an artist's finger over colonial photography. After the fact, disarrays the face from indexing capture. I can say there's a book I don't know how to blurb. A poem can be far afield, reset to 0, avant la lettre, trailing behind, to take care. Naming tells form void of form, footprint prized over the foot indexed on horrific ground and figurative idyll. Half asleep on the couch, noisy party, loud talking at drag race down under on TV, a fictive coincidence of dreams, atmospheric body, erogenous contact, shape of my hair. Gina says strangely animal and vaginal. Vital signals to selfie. Transportive object isn't anti-logic. Private reveries not always territorial. Openly strewn with quivering lanzones, dugout canoes, half dragged upstream, in and out, calves flexed, swinging balikbayans above the rapids, delicate reset, nested. Bag, basket, rolled, bark, net, home, medicine, bundle, shrine, museum, a list from Le Guin. Hair pick in the back pocket, cousins' bell-bottoms swing to bad girls on yellow shag. The Container Store, title of a future chapbook. A holy place I can get to, where I home a narrative of loss. Thin or heavy air, a medium for vibration, without the need to take a direct object. A difference between reconfigure and transfigure configures the pleasure of your company, loving its shape and form here and now. So let's not get farther afield of dread. All laments form an arc, line indexes a spear, infrastructure, a way to declare, here's the point we begin and you end. So space is no longer here, taking a direct object, a gel of selfhood, supplanting ambient forms. The poems A Building's Roman on colonial time, Bring Back My Losers. Demoralized duplicates, delirious with puzzlement, what Hawking calls a brief history of time. You will never see the cup gather itself back together, but you can hurt and be hurtful, interior to life or sacrificial. Once you touch history, pressure your words to deflect from the day's textures, overuse incantation, a detached mother or abstract ancestor, spaces unaware of their fictions, pull from writing a self you think you need to be, just to pull out others' recognition, a self flushed with luminosity. Not unlike the light suffusing a Manila photo studio in the 1870s, caught in long hair, fanned over billowy sleeves and embroidered pañuelos, waves of fringe, decorative edge, pattern over pattern, mammalian mama, photochemical mineralia. Stephanie makes shield and marker of defiance, taking the archival original from holy artifact to grainy Xerox, recaptured, obscured by her hand as subjects obscure their faces with mirrors. And these protective measures, alchemical measures, rehome the fetish into art. In person, a light box turns a mirrored sun into a supernova, halo collapsed, the flared punctum speaks of light's field. I am shadow in a gallery room lit at my left by Lonnie's neon quotation of Little Flower, quoting John of the Cross. And I look into suns smaller than the cold cathode moon in sans serif. Its sentence, not my friend. My mother, the church, hidden in secular pronoun. Smallest, least, greater, more value, all of her, to her, all other. A cold expression. Lit novel, pop psychology, soul, self. My gaze glowed 5 times, sucked by gaseous tattoo. Gia's houseplant, shadow of Jesus Charles Bronson, a shroud burned by dusk. Oh boy, she writes, my own personal enunciation. I am in a vitrine behind a map fringed into palms, dizzied by symbols burnt into a vest, eddying sentences of vernacular Latin, nauseated, hexing and hexed in geometrical type. I dread. I looked up that lore from our ancestral province in a book. It's easy to say immigrants are nostalgic, but nostalgia's in all tales of how to be a thing with a past. Declarative statements that I am you, are we, are they, are that. There are entire factories outsourcing other factories. Maybe I never cared for what you said, but obsessed over your vowels that change pitch. What creeps me out is that condensed feeling indexed by conjure, sans absolutism, or relaxation, so clenched it immerses in claustrophobia. Not once did he own a pair of jeans. That's how formal my dad is. I may, from this day, speak only in polyhedral grief. Thank you. Stacy, happy anniversary.
Thank you. I just want to hear more from both of you. This is so great. Also, this was our first fall reading in the parish hall, so it's a really nice way of launching the season. Thank you all for coming. I also want to thank our staff working tonight, James at the sound table, Gary and Pedro at videography, yes. Our staff support, Heather and Nicole, and our volunteers working tonight for the first time at the Poetry Project. Thank you both for coming, and thank you all for being here.
Let's shout it, hit it, get it.